Okay, so we have our basic web API up and functional so far, and that's a good thing. We've got it working, and we can include doctors and the patient and so on. Now, one thing we don't have the ability, if I go to doctor, right, I don't have the ability to include the collection of patients. Why? Well, basically because of those circular references. We saw that, if you load the patient inside the doctor, but then each patient has a doctor, and each doctor has patients, you get round and around in a circle, and you can never get out of it. So we talked about that issue, as well as the fact that we want to have some protection from overposting attacks. And as well, we just want to improve the overall efficiency, and we might have the possibility of secret properties. We want to stay on the server and not be sent down to the client. So all three of those errors, as well as efficiency, can be dealt with by doing our data transfer objects, right? And as we do that, we'll also have a look at the usefulness of metadata classes, which we could have even introduced last term as well, but we were busy enough, so I didn't bother, right? So just a quick reminder then, if I open up our patient and doctor classes here, what we see right now is the use of this annotation. We said that this solved a lot of our problems at first, right? By putting the annotation JSON ignore, then when our data gets serialized into JSON, this property gets left out. And that meant we cut down the bulk. I mean, why send this summary property that is built with data that's already there in other properties that we definitely have to include, like first, middle, last name, and so on, right? So it was a duplication, just bulking up the data unnecessarily. But the most important one was this one here, right? Because this is how we avoided the circular reference, which is a great thing. It avoided that error, allowed us to actually get it working. But the downside is, if I go to get doctors, there's no option now to include the patients in it, right? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of all these JSON ignores, right? Get rid of all those out of the doctor class. And I believe in patient, I have at least one of them. Yep, just on this summary property as well. Right? Okay, so they are gone. Good, okay? Instead, we're going to use our DTO classes and so on. So as we do that, though, we would want to up the ante a little bit and add some of those other things we talked about. We wanted to add secret properties. We'll do that with our auditable, right? Same as we did last term. But also, I thought we might as well add into the patient, let's make it implement iValidatable object. Just to have show how that can work in or fit in, right, to this overall approach that we're doing as well. So I just thought a simple thing we could do for now is just make sure that when you're entering the date of birth for a patient, you don't accidentally pick the wrong year or something and put something in the future, right? Birth date cannot be in the future, just to have something there. The real point is just to have something in iValidatable object itself. Okay. So that's all the changes I'm going to do in the classes themselves for now until we get Audible in place. But what I'm going to do next is I'm going to make a copy of each class, right? So maybe start with patient. If I just highlight it here, I can just go Control-C, Control-C, Control-V. And that should make a copy of the patient class as a model. I'm going to rename it here, both the file and the class. METADATA. Now, there's nothing magical about those words. It just makes it easy to understand, right? So I'll just change it here as well. Okay. So now I have a copy of patient. It's identical, except I've changed the name to metadata. The purpose of a metadata class is, well, as the name implies, supply the metadata, basically the annotations, right? And this is a good thing because it helps us with our don't repeat yourself, that dry principle, because if we have multiple classes that all sort of inherit, not in the object-oriented meaning of the word, but basically get their annotations from one common class, then we only ever have to update or change it in one place. And we don't run the risk of, forgetting to change it in one class, right? So we're going to make this a metadata class, and the only thing we need in this class are properties that actually have annotations. So even the primary key, I mean, my goodness, what a sin to have a class without a primary key, but that's okay, because I don't actually use this class for anything except to provide the metadata. So I just scan down here. If there are any properties here that don't have an annotation, I can just take them out. Look at that, doctor, okay? The doctor I can just take out because there's no annotation on it. I don't need iValidatable object in here as well because it doesn't actually do anything, right? We're not going to use this class to actually validate anything other than providing annotations. Okay, so I'm just going to save that so far. So that's my patient metadata class. Now, how do we get that, or the metadata from this class, those annotations, applied back in our actual entity model? All I have to do is come up to the top and add one, okay, annotation here on the whole class. Model metadata type of patient, the name I gave the metadata class. So what that allows me to do is come down here and remove all the annotations. In fact, I definitely want to because that way they're only stored in one place and there's less chance of me messing them up by changing it in one area and not another. So it just takes a moment, get rid of all the annotations all the way down through. Even the timestamp I can take out because it's going to get that from the metadata class. Okay, now I will leave the iValidatable object, right? Everything else stays in place here, okay? I didn't take out any properties, just the annotations. Good. So that's good for my patient class. Now, the next one I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this one, my revised patient, inheriting from the metadata, right? And I'm going to make a copy of it to use specifically as the data transfer object. So again, Control-C, Control-V, make another copy. And this one I will rename DTO. And I want it to be my DTO class. Okay, so again, I leave my model metadata type in place, right? But I do want to revise this one. This is the one that I'm going to bundle up to use to actually send the data back and forth between the client and my web API. So, hey, get rid of the summary property. That's duplicate information that's already in other properties. So I'll get rid of that. And that's okay. That's about it for removing things, but so important, right? The DTO classes shouldn't contain an entity class. It should contain another DTO class. So the doctor object itself that will be contained inside the patient will again, I'll change the name to DTO. Now I haven't made that class yet, so it's going to underline in red, say, what are you doing? Okay, well that's okay. We'll fix that in a moment when we make the doctor DTO, right? Okay, so that's the only changes I have to make to the actual DTO class at this point in time. So I'll just save all this work. Now let's come back to doctor. I haven't touched doctor yet. So same thing, I'll go copy paste. First I'll do the metadata version. I have a habit of typing meat data, so I got to be careful of that. Metadata, right? Okay, so again, now, if a property has an annotation, I'll leave it, right? So I'll take out the primary key, but this summary property I'll leave here because it has an annotation. This one doesn't, so I can take it out, right? Annotation, annotation, annotation. Okay, the I collection, there's no annotation on it, so I can take it out. Just properties that are going to supply annotations. There we go. So that one's done, right? So let's come back to the doctor entity. Again, I will provide the annotation for the whole class, the model metadata type of doctor. Metadata. Oh, sorry. That's got to go on top of the class. I'm in the wrong spot. Okay. Then I take out all the annotations. There they are, going, even timestamp. Okay. All the annotations are gone, okay, from the doctor class. Yeah, All right, that's good. Now, so that one's finished. Next, I will make my doctor DTO. So I'll select doctor, Control C, Control V. Okay, so the data transfer objects, among other things, we just take out summary properties that can be rebuilt for other properties that are there. Okay, make sure that the object contained in here is not a patient, but patient DTO. So we're going to have an I collection of patient DTO classes. Now, here's another important point that I want to emphasize. The I collection, in the past, we've always done this kind of code here, right? When we created these I collections back in our MVC course, I would pretty much always instantiate the collection to a new empty collection. Why? Anybody remember? It avoids an error if you ever have to do a dot add, right? You can't go dot add if the collection is null. So as a matter of course, I just got in the habit, it avoided problems. I just always instantiate it to an empty collection. No harm, no foul, and that way you don't run into that problem. Well, that's never going to be an issue for us here. And if, as we sometimes do, we don't want to include anything in this collection when we go get the data and serialize it in JSON, why even mention the existence of this patient, right? So there's no real need for it, so I'm going to take out that initializer that happens in the constructor. So it'll be a collection of patient DTO objects that can be null. Now it's underlining because, yeah, I want to actually put my question mark there, so I can definitely leave it as a null object, basically, as a collection. And that's it. So now I'm done. I've got my new DTO object for doctor, my new DTO object for patient. All the annotations are cleaned out, okay? My summary properties are removed from the DTO patients, but of course they are still, the summary properties, iValidatable object, all that good stuff is in the actual entity object. So they're finely tuned for their job dealing with the database, okay? The metadata is just there to provide the annotations, and the DTO objects are there to optimize the data transfer. All right. Yes, question?
Yeah, so all of this is, like, all we're ultimately really doing, the DTO is the structure of your JSON.
That's right.
And then you're converting it back, and so you just want to save the metadata so that when it gets to the entity framework, it still can be attached to it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, yeah. Yeah, I mean, we could just have the annotations in here and not bother with the metadata class and get the same functionality, but it's just good practice when you have multiple classes that can inherit from the same metadata class to get their annotations. Just that, don't repeat yourself.
It makes it redundant, you can use JSON at that point.
Right, yeah, okay, good. All right, so that's good so far. Now, we did say we want to make it a little bit more interesting by having some secret properties as well. So I will come here, we're going to add our normal classes as we've done in the past for Audible and our interface for iAudible. I'll start with that. Got a drill running somewhere. Feel like I'm at the dentist. Okay, and we'll add our abstract class for Audible. Now, just to quickly mention, you notice the instructions are now up for the project part 1A, and it in the sample code, I actually have the timestamp is included in the Audible class because we're following the approach that every class that's important enough to be Audible should also have concurrency control. But in this case, I'm leaving it out because I want to be able to pick and choose. Okay, so that's good. Those are in place. So which classes are going to be Audible? Well, not my DTOs, just the actual entity classes. In fact, I think I'm only doing the patient. Well, I could make them both. It wouldn't matter. Right? So the patient will inherit from auditable and implement iValidatable object. Yeah, I'll make the doctor auditable as well. Now, of course, we remember from last term we have to do a bit more work to actually make the audible approach functional. One of the things we'll have to have is the ability to, through dependency injection, make the HTTP context accessible inside of our DB context. We do that back in program CS. Anywhere between here and before we actually go builder.build, I need to add this one line of code so that I can inject the HTTP context accessor, right? So that'll be available now when I go to update the actual DB context itself. So medical office context. So just following the exact pattern of code that we did last term as well, I'm going to just replace the constructor here with this chunk of code, right? So we'll have our private read-only HTTP context accessor, right? That gets passed in the constructor, and we can set it up so that we have the, if we actually get to the point where we add identity, okay? Now it's true, at this point, we'll never actually have the name of the logged in user because we aren't putting that in place yet, right? But at least now it'll be there, just an example of some secret properties, and we're forward proofing as we get to that point down the road. Last bit of work to do on that is, of course, the override for save changes, both synchronous and asynchronous. Okay. All right. Good. Okay. Now, the next thing, we've got all this in place so we could start using our DTOs in our controllers primarily, right? So I'm going to close all tabs. Let's just come now to the controllers themselves. So I'll start with the patient controller. So just recall what we have so far, right? Let me just shrink everything down, Control MO. We have at this point in time a few actions. We have get patients, get one patient, get patients, plural, by doctor, and then we have our put, post, and delete. The last one is just for checking for existence, right? Remember, put is an update, post is an insert, and delete is obvious. Okay. So let's start with the actual get, right? We're going to modify these gets to actually use data transfer objects instead of entity objects. So the first one here, our basic get, our IEnumerable collection of patient will now be patient DTO objects, right? Okay. Now I want to build up this class a bit at a time here, or this action, I should say. I want to make a separate query first to get the data we're going to return instead of doing it all in one line of code, right? So this is what it might look like, okay? I'm going to create my collection of patient DTO objects based on, of course, context.patients. I can include the doctor. I don't see any reason not to. That way we'll always be able to show the full name of the doctor who's the primary care physician of the patient, right? But notice this. We're selecting not just properties of a doctor, no, or a patient. We're selecting into a new object, our patient DTO object. That's why we're going to return a collection of patient DTOs. Now, how do we do that? How do we fill in the code to work with this select? Well, basically, it's that old-fashioned approach of taking, first name from this object, assigning it to first name in the second object, last name, et cetera, all the way down through. Very tedious code to write, right? Fortunately, there are lots of tools out there that can help us with this kind of code. AutoMapper is one, but the trouble with that, in my opinion, is it's running all the time, right? Ready to, map things on the fly as you go along. I prefer a tool that you use once and then it gets out of your way, right? So one that I like to use here, I'm just going to go down to our Package Manager console, and the code is right in my copy-paste file. I'm going to install package MappingGenerator, a specific version, because this version was totally free to use, open source basically. I forget the actual license, but it was free to use. And it does everything we need, right? So I'm just going to install that one. And there we go. So what does that give me? Well, let me show you. Right up here, see, I even got my little light bulb suggesting quick actions, right? So if I come down here, now these show up. Oh, they could have showed you they weren't there before. Initialize with local variables. That's what I actually want. See, you can do sample values, lorem ipsum stuff, right? And lambda parameters, etc. I'm just going to go with local variables. Look at all that code it wrote for me. That's nice, eh? Yeah, I don't mind that. That's good. In fact, it's given me more than I actually even want or need, right? Because you see it's gone into the patient, but the patient has a doctor, so it gets that data. And then, come here, the patient now has a doctor, right? But it says, oops, stop recursive mapping right there. It's pretty smart, right? That's good. Okay, now do we even need all of this? No. I do want the patient properties. And this is great, the fact that it checks, if there is a doctor, then we'll build our new, and it's smart enough to see, no, we want a doctor DTO inside our patient DTO, right? But I don't want the patient's collection inside the doctor of the patient, right? So I'll definitely take that out for sure. You can just remove it, right? Do I want the row version even? No. I mean, I'm going to care about concurrency of the patient, but we're focused on the patient controller here. We aren't going to worry about, we're not going to modify the doctor object that's inside of the patient anyway, so I don't need that either. So I'm going to take that out as well. All I want from the doctor is first, middle, and last name. Good idea to have the primary key. That'll always be handy to have. And that's it. That's exactly the code that I want, right? Now, I haven't got my return yet. That's why I'm still underlining up here. So what do I want to do? Well, we're going to get in the habit going forward of trying to give as much feedback to the client as possible. So we never really bothered with this even in MVC, but I can check to see if I actually even have any data at all, right? Even though it's our basic get, okay? So the only reason this would ever not have anything is if I had no patients in the system whatsoever. But it doesn't hurt to have this as a check on the system anyway. So as long as I actually have some patients, then I'm going to return my collection of patient DTOs. Else, okay, I'll return, now remember, a Web API controller, all it actually returns are status codes, right? It returns a response. A response always has a status code. It may bundle updated be included along with it as well. So I can return a not found, which is a 404, right? Which is one of the, is successful? No, it's not a success status code, right? It's a 404, but at the same time, we can start giving it additional information. I can add a new message saying error, no patient records found in the database. Not very likely that's ever going to happen, but it's a good practice to put this in place. Okay, let's go on to the next. The next one returns a single patient identified by ID. Well, we don't want a patient, we want a patient DTO, right? And it's going to be very much the same kind of code, right? In fact, the exact same query that was generated with the help of my mapping tool, MappingGenerator, it's exactly the same query I use in here. So it's the same thing, patient DTOs. Okay, actually, I don't need a plural though. Technically, it's just patient DTO. I'm just getting one. Oh, I copied the wrong code, that's why. I'm in the wrong one. Sorry. I should have recognized that right away. There. Patient DTO, right? So we're still including, okay, the doctor. We select our new patient DTO object. How does the filtering work? Well, we've seen this before. I can do it right in my first or default, right? I can specify that the ID, the primary key, must match the parameter I passed in at the top, right? It's a very efficient way to do a filter like that because it's even quicker than a where clause because it actually, the find first or default means as soon as it finds one match, it'll stop, right? Okay. Then again, we'll check if it's null. In that case, we'll return a not found, okay? Error, the patient was not found in the database. Now that's more realistic. We might possibly ask for a patient by an ID that they've just been deleted or something, right? And then we return the patient DTO. Okay. All right. Now our third variation on a get here was when we filter patients by a doctor. Remember, we had this set up. We made up our own phrase here to be part of the URI. We said by doctor. I could say by physician. It wouldn't matter whatever I say here as long as that's how I ask for it, right? And then pass the ID of the one I want. We had that in place already. But now, once more, switching it to use DTO, okay? we're going to basically have the same query as we had before, but we're just going to have a where clause to filter by the doctor ID, right? So it's patients, including the doctor. So there's our where clause, right? Can't use first or default because we have a whole collection, not just one defined. So where the doctor ID, the foreign key of the patient matches the ID we've passed in, right? We select them all, same code as the beginning. If we have a count of greater than 0, we return the data. Otherwise, no patients for the specified doctor. So you can see, hey, this is still a code, whatever it is, 404, right? But the difference is we're giving a specific message, no patients for that specified doctor, right? That's good. Okay. All right. So, you know what, we'll run this even now. I haven't got to the doctor controller yet. I'll just show you something before we go on. Okay, so coming down to the patient controller now, no change here. Right? It still works exactly the same, but what's changed is the data I'm getting here, right? So now I have it all. There's no circular references, but there's no summary properties. They're gone, okay, even though I don't have JSON ignore there anymore. Now you will see a couple of row versions here, or null values. Row version null, patients null, right? That's a little bit of a, I don't like that. Right? Why even mention it if it's null, right? So that's maybe the next thing we'll fix. I'll just share this with you. We can control some options for our JSON serializer. This I do back in program.cs, where a line that we already had, okay? Builder.services.add controllers. As we add the controllers, we have the option of specifying, well, multiple options, I guess I should say, right? So the one I'm going to put in place here, well, actually I'll select that as well. I'm going to add JSON option. A JSON serializer option, default ignore condition is set to when writing default. I'll just point out that you actually have a couple choices here. Let me just back this out. Hit dot. Come on. Hit dot. Where's my IntelliSense? Okay. There's when writing null and when writing default. Okay, I think my system's just a little busy. The IntelliSense wasn't coming up very quick. So just to show you that difference, let me run it again. Oh, okay, that's why I've got a bill there. Something in my copy paste I messed up here. So let me just. There we go. Build succeeded. All right. Yeah, I couldn't quite see what it was easily, but there it is fixed, right? So when writing default, okay, now if I run, probably was missing a dot or something. If I come down to patient again, try it out, and you see now no more mention of those ones that were null, the patient's collection and the row version, right? Gone. Good. So we've made real progress here. Now, let's do the same thing in the doctor controller. Okay. Now, because we've gone through it a couple times already, I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time. I think I'll just get the code in place here. For basically our get for the doctors, right? Point out, of course, we're returning Dr. DTO. Okay. Now, once more, we have to actually use our mapping generator to help us get the proper local variables in place. All right. Way more code than I need, right? Because we mentioned earlier that we probably want the option of including the patients in the doctor or not, right? We wouldn't want the patients if, say, we're just getting a list of doctors to show in a pick list or a combo box or a select, something like that, right? Yes, we don't want the patients loaded in there, but sometimes we do. So what we would do here is I can take all this code and basically remove everything I don't want. So I don't want the whole patient's collection, right down to there. That's all I'm really after. Okay, so I'll get my doctor DTO, just getting first, middle, last name, and I will include the row version because that might be important, especially if I'm going to do any concurrency, right? So better safe than sorry and have that in there. That's pretty important data. So that's good. So that gives me my choice, like I had before, of just getting the doctor information. But what if I do want to include, okay, the patient's collection in it? Then all we have to do is I'm going to make a copy of this. Paste it in. Obviously, I can have two of the same name. Now, this is arbitrary, whatever. I like to use INC, short for include, but I could use any characters I want. The characters aren't important, right? But how do we tell the GET request? Because, the GET request comes in, it gets channeled appropriate to the action in the controller by these annotations. Nothing to do with the name I give here, right? So how do I tell the GET request that I want it to come to this get doctor include as opposed to the first one, right? All I have to do is add an option in here, INC, for example, or whatever letters you wanted to use, right? So if you go /doctor/INC, then it will route it to this action instead. So I'll go get my doctor, and basically, I can modify the code here. All I really need to change is I can use the mapping generator once more. I just won't take out as much stuff, right? I'm going to leave the patient collection in there this time. Now, I don't want the doctor, right, inside the patient. Okay, that would be circular. Okay, I will take out, I don't need the comma. I don't need the row version. Right? I'm not going to worry about concurrency on a child object inside the doctor. So that should do it, right? Yeah, so I have all the properties of the doctor. I have my patient DTO. Remember, we're selecting into a patient DTO here, right? That collection. And I'm leaving out anything from even that I don't want, like the row version, right? And I'm not going to populate, okay, the doctor inside the patient, inside the doctor. Okay. So the main difference between those two is just basically the routing I'm providing through this annotation, right? Okay, now we have our get doctor singular, right? So for that, we'll get two variations of it as well, using our doctor DTO. Make sure I'm copying the right code here, sorry. Okay, so the first get doctor, we just pass the ID, right? And that is used in first or default to get the one doctor, okay? And we're just getting the basic properties of the doctor. If instead we go INC/ before we pass the ID, then it'll be routed to this action, and we'll get the doctor DTO, the one doctor identified, but with the patient loaded in, the entire patient collection, all the patients assigned to the one doctor. And that's it. That's basically, we're ready to go. So let me just run this again. So coming to the doctor now, this is the more interesting one. Here I can just go get all the doctors, and there they are, right? All my doctors without patients, of course, okay? Or, if I want to, I can come down to doctor include, and there we are. So Gregory House has got Fred Reginald Flintstone, Wilma J. Flintstone, 2 patients, okay? The other doctors I have here just have 1 patient each, right? But notice there's nothing null sitting there. We removed all that with those JSON serialization, the JSON serializer options that we put in program.cs. So we've cleaned up all that. We're happy with this. This is good. Any questions about it? All right, well, I'll stop and start the recording.